Hello everyone, I'm back again, and this is my full review of the LG B9 OLED. So, let's start off with a couple of things. First is, I think I mentioned in the last video, but setup of this TV is a little bit cumbersome. There's a lot of agreements and, check marks to go through, basically just agreeing that, you agree to LG's terms and yada yada yada. So I'm not going to go through that again, but it did need to be mentioned. Second, I did go over this in the video, but your TV comes, in this box, and the TV itself is extremely thin, so it's extremely fragile. As I said in my last video, if you want to put the TV, once it's assembled, onto your stand, you need to lift from the bottom here and then just above this thing up here. Anything higher and you risk damaging the screen. The LG B9 OLED has 4 HDMI ports, 1, 2, 3, and 4. All ports are HDMI 2.1, 48 gigabits per second. So it's got a little bit of a one-up on its newest TV, which is the LG C10 or B10, which only have HDMI they have HDMI 2.1, but they don't have 48 gigabits per second. They only have 40 gigabits per second. Whether or not that'll affect things, only the future will tell. So I had someone ask me about the Nakamichi's implementation with the LG B9 OLED, and in a word, it's honestly flawless. So all you need to do is plug the Nakamichi into the ARC port. You might not be able to see it back here. If you can't, I apologize. I'm trying my best. I don't have very much light to work with. But anyway, there's an ARC port back here, and that's where the Nakamichi goes into. In doing so, you plug your Nakamichi into the audio return channel, and boom! Please note that the Nakamichi is not as advanced as, say, the Q90R or the Sonos ARC, and it does not support eARC. At least not yet, and I don't think it will in the future either. I don't really consider that a downside, but some people it may be a deal breaker because they want the latest and greatest technology. Picture on this TV is stunning. I mean, just look at it. This is a fairly dark room, of course, but even with that, there's a little bit of light in it, and you can just see how the picture just pops. Originally, I was going to wait until my calibrator came here, but he'll be coming here actually this Saturday, and I really didn't want to wait that long, as a couple of you have basically said exactly what I was thinking, and that was that I haven't posted a video in a really long time. So I figured I better get on that and forego the review of what the TV looks like calibrated afterwards. So right now, the TV is a bit oversaturated. It does really pop, but it is a little bit oversaturated. The B9 comes with very, very off presets, unlike the C9 or the C10. I don't know about the B10, but I know for sure that, at least out of the box, calibrated, this TV is not even close to what it should look like. That being said, though, when we go into our picture modes, there are quite a few. So there's game mode, we have HDR effect mode, which I never use, Technicolor Expert Bright, I think. Nope, just Technicolor Expert. So then Expert Bright Room, Expert Dark Room. And then there's Vivid, oversaturated, bloom in your eyes. There's Standard. You have, I don't know what that is, APS, Cinema mode, Sports mode, and of course you have your game mode. So, one thing I will say about this TV, although I appreciate all the options that it has, it may feel a little bit overwhelming to someone who's not used to it. Like, there are so many tweaks, so many things hidden in the menus that it can confuse even, the most experienced people at first. So when you go into your picture modes here, and And I just want to show you guys something because I made a mistake in my last review. So let's go over setting picture mode color. In my last review, I said that picture mode color could not be adjusted. That was incorrect. That was because eye comfort mode was on. So now I'm going to turn that off. Note all the blue light that let in though, or at least a little bit more blue light. It's a lot brighter now. Now if we go into our picture mode settings and we scroll down to expert controls, scroll down to white balance, and voila, there's your color temperatures. It took me a couple more minutes to find it, but it is there. So right now it's under medium, which I don't want. I want it under warm too, because that's the most accurate to the human eye. So there is that. Super resolution doesn't need to be on either. I don't know why that's on. It only needs to be on if you're running, well, it doesn't even need to be run at 1080p content, but it does sharpen 1080p content slightly. So yeah, that's a couple of picture settings that I would change from the get-go. If you really want, you could turn on eye comfort mode during the nighttime. I do it just to give my eyes a break, but it's not necessary. Once you turn off the eye comfort mode, you can adjust the OLED light and etc. Just keep in mind that SDR content at brighter levels does tend to have a little bit more risk of burn-in. So yeah. So since I've owned this TV, I've put it through a couple of tests. I've run Ghost of Tsushima on it for HDR. I've run Persona 5 on it for SDR. I've run Super Mario Odyssey on it. And, you know, no matter what I throw at it, it just looks fantastic. And, you know, therein lies, I think, the difference, or one of the prime differences between a QLED and an OLED. And that is that with QLEDs, I find that you have to really tweak your settings to get them exactly the way that you want them. But with an OLED, you don't have to do as much tweaking, if that makes sense, because the picture just looks stunning on its own. So I had someone ask me about HDR on a QLED versus an OLED. Now this is a very tricky, slippery slope, but I'll do my best to explain why I think HDR on the B9 and etc. is better than HDR on the Q9FN, the Q90R, the Q90T, or etc. And I think it's personally because brightness isn't everything. So Samsung likes to boast that it has approximately 1300 nits of brightness. It's pasted all over their web page. But brightness is only half of what I think HDR actually is. I think HDR actually relies a lot more on not only lighting conditions, or sorry, rather the way that the lighting is portrayed in game, but also in contrast. And one thing that an OLED excels at is contrast. Contrast on OLEDs just can't be beat, at least not yet. I hear, though, that Samsung is working on what is known as kind of like an OLED QLED kind of hybrid, which should be very, very interesting to see what they come up with. But in the meantime, you're probably going to be waiting another year for that. So the other thing about the LG B9 is response time is just fantastic. However, I did notice during motion, there seems to be a little tiny bit, maybe about a half millisecond of input lag. So for example, in Ghost of Tsushima, when you're scaling the cliffs, sometimes it's a lot slower on an OLED versus when you play Ghost of Tsushima on a QLED. And I don't know why that is, but like when you're climbing the cliffs, it's instantaneous jumping from you know, cliff, how would I put this? Cliff grip to cliff grip. Whereas with the OLED, it takes a couple of seconds to kind of climb up. Now, you might think that that's more realistic, but here's the thing. This TV technically has a much lower input lag than the QLED does. So I'm not sure if it's because of the way that it perceives motion or what it is, but I just thought I'd point it out because I thought that that was very interesting. Let's see. So yeah, gaming on this thing, movies on this thing are just so crystal clear. I'll say this. Even during watching some of my anime shows, the OLED was able to pull out details that I had never catched before. And it does this on a consistent basis. Like if you play Ghost of Tsushima, once again I'll use Ghost of Tsushima as my example. When you play it on the QLED, the sunlight is shining sort of in the background, but there's a much more vibrant image kind of all around you in the environment. But on an OLED, not only is the environment detailed, but the sunlight shines like it's right shining in your face like in real life. And I think it has to do with, because the pixels themselves are self-emissive, I think that's part of it. And I think that the way that HDR is implemented on OLEDs is just superior. Now, of course, not by much, but it is there, and, having 1300 nits means nothing if the HDR implementation is not as good. Playing on the QLED as well, I noticed that at least dark details seem to get just absolutely, not completely, but, crushed a little bit. Like when you were walking around with the ghost armor on the QLED, the symbol was very hard to see on the cape of the ghost armor. But when you're playing it on the OLED, you can see the symbol clear as day, and you can see the way that the type of how can I put it, material that the cape is made out of. So OLED is able to pull out these details in absolute spades. That being said, the OLED's not perfect. When it comes to actual color range, I think that personally a QLED does a little bit better. And it's just because it can get a lot of colors that an OLED can't. It's hard to explain though. The OLED can make up for the color difference with contrast, but the QLED can make up for the contrast difference with color. And so the colors are a lot brighter, the color range is a lot more expansive on QLEDs. And, it is very noticeable. The other thing I would say is that QLEDs, again, when it comes to SDR content, I find that the QLED handles it just slightly, and I mean very slightly better than the OLED. But that might also be because my OLED hasn't been calibrated yet, and yet my QLED has. Pardon me. That's not COVID, that's just allergies. So, that's my take on that. HDR on this TV, especially HDR gaming, just absolutely blew me away. Like, how immersive it was, how realistic it was. Like, yeah, I don't really have a lot of bad things to say about it. But let's go back to the Nakamichi for a minute. So Nakamichi, just, I don't know why, but it's just seamless on the OLED as opposed to the QLED. I don't have any problems with the Nakamichi on the OLED. Sometimes it might take a second to kick in, but otherwise it's always detected. It turns on right away. It goes to the last source it was on. In this particular case, it's ARC. If it was on the PlayStation 2 last time, it'll switch. And yeah. What you should know, however, is soundbars and, how can I put this? Soundbars and TVs are very different. Plugging a game system into a TV directly versus plugging a game system into a soundbar, very different. The sound might be better because it's going directly into the soundbar, but I don't know about input lag overall in picture. I've noticed, however, not a huge drop in quality. The other thing is that the Nakamichi has Dolby Vision automatically kind of baked into it, so it automatically detects when there is Dolby Vision. It also automatically detects when there's Dolby Atmos being passed. So, you know, that's kind of nice. On the Samsung, or rather on the QLED, I struggled with it so many times for it to try and find the Nakamichi, for it to recognize the Nakamichi, and is the Nakamichi being recognized? And it was just so... I don't know why, but Tizen did not like the way that the Nakamichi was designed. However, I've had no such problems with the Nakamichi on the OLED. Now, one thing I almost forgot though, if you go into your sound menu, sound out menu, and see how it says you have to select HDMI ARC in order for it to kind of detect properly. There's more to it, of course. When you go into the sound menu as well, you can sometimes change. You can change if it's detecting eARC or not, or if you want your TV to detect an eARC signal. You have to go into the sound menu and turn that on manually. So yeah, you know, there isn't really much more I can say. I have not experienced any such burn-in yet. I've had the TV for about 2 months now. I haven't done any burn-in testing though, where you flash the color picture on the screen and then whatnot. So, you know, there is that. So take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, as far as the remote goes, you know, I was on board with it at first, but I have to admit that having so many buttons on a remote is a little bit cumbersome, if I can put it that way. If you like the Magic Remote, then you like it. But personally, I'm not a huge fan. I mean, look at all these buttons. Do we really need this many buttons? I still have never used the shortcut button. This is your sources button, Netflix button. Those are the primary buttons I use, and the back button, and then maybe the middle button. But other than that, other than volume up and down, or sometimes the settings button, all these other buttons are unnecessary for me. I will never, ever use them. So, you know, the other thing is, sometimes I find that when I'm aiming the remote at the TV, I have to aim it just slightly above the soundbar and down. You see how my hand is like this? Because I find that the LG's Magic Remote, unfortunately, because it's not Bluetooth, it doesn't have as large a range, so it's infrared. So it's relying on those old infrared signals, and you gotta point it, and you gotta click it, and yeah, it's kind of annoying sometimes because, you know, I was so used to being able to just turn on the TV and kind of call it a day. I wish that LG would still, if they're going to continue with the Magic Remote design, that's fine, but I wish it was Bluetooth. I really do, or I wish that it was a little bit easier for the TV to detect. So another thing you should know about the LG B9 is that it's not constructed as premium. It still looks pretty premium. I personally like this design, this stand design better than the C9, because the C9 is a lot bigger and it extends longer wise, and the stand and the overall TV sits lower, which I'm not a fan of. But to each their own, right? So, you know, that's just a personal preference of mine. But the TV itself is not constructed from, like, see this? It's a plastic back here. It's not aluminum. And then a plastic bottom here where all the ports are. It's plastic. So what you're saving money on is materials. That doesn't mean that the picture is any worse than the C9 or the C10 or whatever. But just keep in mind, this is what you're getting into. And I don't know, longevity-wise, if this TV will hold up or not. 2 months in, still working like a charm. But who knows what the future will bring. Another thing I wanted to mention is, unfortunately, LG has decided that the B9, C9, etc. models will not get the FreeSync update. So if you want FreeSync, you're going to have to get the C10 or the B10 or the G10. You don't have a choice, unfortunately. They're not going to update the older models. This does have G-Sync, though, although I haven't used it. It does have G-Sync compatibility, so if you are a G-Sync person and your graphics card is NVIDIA, then you won't have a problem with the B9, the C9, or etc. However, I will say that the C9 in 77-inch at least is extremely hard to track down. I couldn't personally find one where I live, and so I settled for the B9 because I wanted that particular size. So when you're plugging the Nakamichi into the B9, other than the ARC port, what you should consider is, what features you want. So let's say, for example, the Xbox One X. The Xbox One X has variable refresh rate, but you won't get variable refresh rate if you plug the Xbox One X through the soundbar into the TV. However, if you plug the Xbox One X directly into the TV in the back, then you'll get the variable refresh rate turned on and the instant game response. That's what you want. But unfortunately, passing it through the soundbar will not give you that result. Thankfully, the LG B9 also has Dolby Atmos over ARC, which is very nice. I haven't been able to try eARC yet, or rather I haven't made time to try eARC yet, but look for that in my next review. I'm going to do an updated review of the Q90R soundbar and eARC, and if it really makes a difference, and if you should consider switching if you have the Nakamichi. I mean, I have my doubts. It does sound like all buzzwords and gimmicks to me, but only my ears will be able to tell, right? Okay, so, the Nakamichi works like a charm with this TV. Like I said, I've never had any problems with it. All my devices work with this TV. This TV just automatically, most of the time, knows what they are. Even my older devices, it knows. If it doesn't know, then I can just manually adjust the picture. Oh, on the note of picture, so when you're using a Apple TV 4K, I'd recommend that you do not turn on Dolby Vision. Now, why not? Well, because Dolby Vision is being forced over top of HDR in a way, so, at least in my opinion, this is how it looks to me. So, what you should do instead is, and again, don't worry, that's not COVID, that's just allergies. What you should do instead is set your Apple TV to 4K SDR and set frame rate to match and dynamic range to match. This way, if you do play Dolby Vision content, the Apple TV will automatically pick it up. If you play Dolby Vision content with Dolby Atmos, the Apple TV should automatically pick it up in theory. So, you still get the best looking SDR you can, with an OLED TV, and you'll still have the best HDR possible because you're not forcing it. Now, that being said, SDR on this TV, do not expect miracles. It's pretty bright, but compared to a QLED, it doesn't hold a candle. SDR on a QLED is still far and away ahead of its competition. And this is just because of the way it is. Like, LED technology can get much brighter. That being said, I don't honestly think you'll notice the difference very much, unless, of course, you're playing in a very dark room with two very large lamps or something, or you have a really large window. And that's another thing, too. If you buy an OLED, you do not, under any circumstances, want that TV back by the window. It can affect and warp the OLED screen from the sunlight. I was told this by my rep very recently. So do not get an OLED and put it in your front window or where the sun is beaming directly down on top of it. You will wreck your TV, and that's like $6,000 down the drain if you get one the size of mine. Now mine didn't cost that much, but that's pretty much what they cost in this size. So just keep that in mind. So when setting up devices into the Nakamichi and into your TV respectively, make sure that you follow the Nakamichi instructions guide. They'll tell you exactly which devices and how to connect them, which way, and yada yada. I learned the hard way not to set the Xbox One X to 10-bit because honestly, it'll break your picture. What you need to do instead is set it to 8-bit, and then when you play HDR content, it'll upconvert it automatically to 10-bit anyways. So yeah, the more you know, right? One thing that I think I talked about earlier with this TV that is sort of a little bit of a downside is motion, but only with like older retro games. I don't know, it's just the way that it's shown on screen sort of bugs me a little bit, but I don't know how to describe why. My advice, if you're gonna be playing retro games and you don't have a retro tank or a frame meister or something to make the gameplay smoother, my advice is just don't, because they just don't look very good on the OLED. And therein lies the other problem with OLED, if you can really consider this a problem. OLEDs make everything look bad in comparison. So I was at my parents' for a week, and I was watching stuff on their TV, playing games on their TV. They have a Q8 FN, and that's a really good TV, pretty good black levels overall. So, you know, but then, you know, I started to notice just little things. And when I got home, it made me appreciate my OLED that much more. No joke. The way light hits the ground in games, the way writing looks, the way everything is sharpened, the way you are able to pull out details which you couldn't see before. Like, it's crazy. And so when you're playing content on an OLED TV, you want to play content that makes it look good. Like 4K, HDR, yeah, that's what looks best on this TV. Anything else doesn't look as good. It's kind of funny. You know, I never really would have considered that to be a downside, but if you think about it, if you're an old school gamer and you're playing, like, I don't know, Sony PlayStation 1 perhaps, or Nintendo 64, or, you know, even before that, it's not going to look good on this TV. If you're a major DVD buff and you don't have any way to up-res your DVDs, it's not going to look good on this TV. If you are a Blu-ray guy, it will look good on this TV, but it won't look good as 4K HDR. It's crazy. This TV actually, for me, has set a new standard of picture quality, and that's not me just saying that either. Okay, so, you know, for menus and stuff though, like I said, it can be a little bit convoluted. So look at all this stuff. So you've got picture mode, you've got aspect ratio, you've got sound mode, you got sound out, you got sleep timer, blah, 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 blah. If you go into all settings, you got this, and then you got all this, including stuff under general that's hidden. Like, it's just crazy. Just crazy. Like, it really is. And, you know, yeah, just know what you're getting into is all I'm going to say. If you're someone who likes to kind of tweak things and, you know, you want the best picture quality, in my opinion, buy an OLED. It doesn't have to be the LG B9, but get an OLED. If you're like a major film buff especially, I'd highly recommend getting an OLED. If you don't care about that, but you want a vibrant picture and you can't stomach the idea of burn-in, then yeah, get a QLED. But if I were you, I would get the Q9FN. Now let me explain why. The Q9FN was Samsung's answer to the very first, well, some of the very first OLEDs that came out. Samsung saw that, you know, LG was beating them in black levels. LG was beating them in a number of different areas with the self-emissive pixels. So Samsung went to the drawing board and, you know, they came up with the Q9FN. And the black levels on the Q9FN are stellar. Not as good as an OLED, but they're still pretty darn good. Colors, fantastic. Colors are definitely better on the QLED. HDR, although not as good as an OLED, is still very impressive on LCD technology. And, again, you're not losing really out on anything by getting a 2018 model other than HDMI 2.1. Of course, if you're thinking of getting one of the newer consoles which require 2.1, then maybe get a Q90T, but I'm skeptical. Because I feel like a lot of the models after 2018 have been scaled back because I guess Samsung gave up on directly competing with OLED and instead went in a completely different direction and tried to outperform them. And that's why the Q90R has such a high brightness rate. It has such a low input lag. It's because Samsung basically said, well, look, we tried our best with the Q9FN and it did really well, but it just still wasn't good enough, and we're not going to pour more money into this, so instead, let's take this in a different direction. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what happened. So, in conclusion, honestly, if you can still find the B9 at a reasonable price, or the C9 even, get them. They're amazing TVs. Probably, it's my favorite TV that I've ever owned. But if you're not convinced, then get a QLED. But just keep in mind that QLEDs, up until the year 2020, do not support HDMI 2.1, and ARC is iffy on them at best. You can't, over ARC, you can't have Dolby Atmos. You can only have Dolby Digital Plus or Dolby Digital. And so you're kind of held back in a way. That being said, though, if you want something as close to OLED as you can possibly manage, but you don't want to get an OLED, get a Q9FN. That's my personal opinion. Or a Q8FN, but just keep in mind that the Q8FN can't get nearly as bright as the Q9. If you can't get either of those, get a Q90R. If you can't get any of those, then I guess settle for the Q90T. But I don't recommend it. Going forward, honestly speaking, as much as I like Samsung, if they only have one HDMI 2.1 port, it's not worth it to you, the consumer. You need to have at least 4, and you need to have 48 gigabits per second. We're coming into the new age now. Just my personal opinion. So what about some other things on this TV? Sports? Fantastic. Sports is like, it's honestly awesome. I don't know how else to describe it. And yeah, I think that about wraps it up. But I'll say this. I would like to do another video, but the next one will be on how this TV looks after it's been calibrated, and I'll talk about if it's worth it for you to do so after you've upgraded, or if you'd be better off just leaving it alone. Anyways, if you like my video, you can always hit the like button, share with your friends, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and stay healthy, stay safe. Cheers. Bye for now, guys.